Reuters is reporting that the Justice Department is considering a probe of the iPhone maker. This coming as Apple's Worldwide Developers Conference is underway. Ray Wang, principal analyst and founder of Constellation Research, joins us now live from the event. And Ray, we'll get to the latest from the event in just a little bit. But first, I want to start with the latest just in terms of the DOJ probe. What do you make of this news?
Yeah, so we got a number of DOJ probes going on right now between Google and the Apple and then FTC on the Amazon side. And I think there's just the sense that, hey, is big tech too big? And I think one of the things that we have to be cautioned about is that in the larger picture of a global war between China and the U.S. in terms of for dominance in tech and dominance for intellectual property, it's actually not too big, right? We have to think about the fact that in China, they've got Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent versus our Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Apple, and others, right? We don't want to end up in a situation where we're like in Europe, where they're too small to be able to get to scale and compete, but we also want to make sure there's a good balance. And I think that's really what the DOJ probes and the FTC probes are, is trying to figure out what that right point for balance is going to be in regulation, self-regulation, as well as putting the right rules in place so that there's a fair market for others to compete.
So, Ray, I mean, this obviously is a concern here for shareholders. We saw the stock market the stock's reaction after this news broke. Right now, it's trading down just around 1%. But in terms of what you're saying, it sounds like we shouldn't be too worried that some of these big U.S. tech giants will eventually be broken up.
Yeah, I think we probably shouldn't be as worried, but I think there are going to be rules, right? Mm-hmm. Who owns your personal data? For example, that's an area where individuals should be able to own their own personal data and see how they work. That's one of the big announcements here at Apple today, right? Protecting that. But a lot of these businesses are built on that personal data in what we call data-driven digital networks, and they've turned into digital duopolies. Think about in the advertising space, Google versus Facebook, right? They're $135 billion, $100 billion ad companies. And who gets to compete? Well, the only one that can make it seems to be Amazon, which has $10 billion in ads and barely creeping in. But they're really big. And the question is, do we end up with duopolies? Do we end up with oligopolies in this space in order to compete at a global scale? And I think that's going to be an important factor.
Hey, Ray, which company out of all these tech giants that we're talking about, we have Apple, Alphabet, Facebook, and Amazon all up on the screen right now. Which one do you think is most at risk of facing the biggest regulatory pressure, I guess we could say, in the short term?
I think the biggest one is probably going to be Amazon, and it's mostly because of their market dominance is not in one industry. People think it's just retail, but it's going to be in banking, it's in logistics, it's in commerce payments, it's going to be in these other areas, media, advertising. And so the question is, what do you do when someone gets that big and using personal data to transact against? What rules can be put into place? And one might actually think that maybe if individuals own their personal data, their genomics, their biometrics, their social media data, and that becomes a property right, you might have the ability to then create that regulation that frees up that data, which allows more competitors to occur. So I think that's one of. I think the least at risk is probably Apple, given the announcements that are being made here. I think Microsoft is also least at risk, given their privacy stances. What they've been talking about here at the Apple Developers Conference is the fact that they want you to own your own data. They don't want to share that data with advertisers or social media, and they're building subscription revenue models against that, which is very different than the ad-supported model that's out there.
Right, let's talk about more of, in terms of what they're announcing out at the Worldwide Developers Conference right now. We have the tech giant unveiling its upgraded operating system, the iOS 13. Let's watch them as Apple rolled this out.
iOS 13 is a huge release packed with lots of capabilities, but we know that nothing is more important to our iPhone users than performance. So this year, we worked top to bottom in the system, making everything faster that you do the most. Things like unlocking with Face ID, now 30% faster.
So, Ray, they unveiled iOS 13. My big question, though, is with iPhone sales slowing, Apple needs to do something in order to combat these slowing sales. Is this enough to get people excited and out there buying new phones?
Yeah, I think it's not necessarily about just buying phones. It's consuming new services, right? If you think about all the tech giants, all the media companies and entertainment companies and communications, these are basically content, network, plus technology. In Apple's case, you have a hardware device, you now have a network, and then they're providing content. And when they bring these three together, that's what's going to accelerate services revenue. What they've done is taken a lot of the efficiencies that are required to actually get a product out faster, allowed you to download something faster, be more efficient, and make it easier for developers to work. This is a lot easier ecosystem to work and program in than what's in on a Google Android system or in other areas. And so you can see that that's kind of one of the challenges that most people have, because if you look at the upgrade cycle on an Apple, there's probably about 90% of the folks on iOS on the latest release or higher, and on Android it's like 10%. and that makes it very hard for people to build apps on Android and monetize.
Ray, has Apple's announcement so far, from what you've heard, has it lived up to your expectations in terms of today?
I think we're all looking for that big bang announcement, and I think it's not there, but I think there's a lot of incremental improvements here. I stepped out for a little bit. I'm hoping that maybe they announce a new MacBook Pro. If they don't do that, or a Mac Pro, if they don't do that, maybe they'll do that in September. But I think what people are excited about is the privacy announcements, the personalization that's going on, the HomePod, HomeKit. I think there's a lot of HealthKit announcements that are going on back in there. So,
all right, Ray Wang, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, thanks a lot.